Welcome to week 2 of our Spooky and Sweet quilt along. Now this is a free pattern from Fat Quarter Shop, and in week 1 we made the witchy ghost. And week 2 we're going to be making some star blocks. This year we decided instead of using prints that we would use Bella solids because when Jocelyn designed this quilt it has so many intricate pieces, and I think you're going to love the solid this year. It's kind of a difference from our previous years. We're also doing a cross stitch along, and you can find all of that free at Fat Quarter Shop. So let's get started. Your first step is to download your free pattern. This time it's 3 pages and we are on week 2. We're going to be making a large star block and then a rectangular star block that has 2 stars. They're called Spirit Star and Spooky Stars. Now last week we really worked on corner squares and 1/4-inch seams. This week, we're going to start working on harder pieces like hourglass and half square triangles. And if you just follow the video, I feel confident that you can do it. So cut all your pieces, label them with your alphabetes. If you don't have alphabetes, use Post-it notes, but definitely have to label your fabrics when you're cutting so you don't get your pieces confused, since there are a lot of similar pieces. We're going to go to page 2 and we're going to start with our Spirit Star, and we're going to start with half square triangles. Your first step is to make half square triangles. You're going to take your fabric C squares and your fabric M squares. And what we're going to do is we're going to take one of each, put them right sides together, and then you can draw your line. You can do this 2 ways. I'm going to show you 2 different ways. You can draw a line in the center, and that's not the line you're going to stitch on. You're going to stitch a 1/4 inch away from the center. So I like to draw the lines. So you'll have 3 lines and you'll be stitching on the lines on the outside. Now this is the way I used to do it, but now that there's this seam guide by Creative Grids, you can just place this where the center is on the edges of your triangles and draw the line, and that is what you get. Then you're going to take this and you're going to stitch only on those outside lines. Now here, we used red thread just so you could see what it looks like. What you're really going to use is a gray thread. My favorite gray is Aurifil 2600 because it's light enough to not show too much. You're going to take that, and once you have sewn, you're going to cut in the center, and that's going to give you 2 half square triangles for every square that you start with. You're going to make a total of 8 of these. I'm going to take this and I'm going to press this towards the gray. Now from here we need to trim this down to 2 inches. Put your Creative Grids ruler with your diagonal line on that seam and cut 2 sides. Then you will flip that around, line up the 2-inch lines here and here. Also line up the diagonal line. And that's going to give you a perfect half square triangle with very little waste. You're going to make 8 of these. Now what I wanted to show you is we're going to be doing something a little bit different this week than we did last week. Last week we pressed all of our arrows according to the pattern. This week I'm going to press open, and the reason I'm going to do that is just to show you a different look, but also this has a lot of small pieces and I think it's going to come out better. So you can try both methods, see which one you like best. Then from here you're going to take 2 of those half square triangles, put the greens together, take 2 fabric D squares and lay them just like this. You're going to stitch with a 1/4 inch seam, press, and then stitch with a 1/4 inch seam. And this is what it's going to look like. You're going to end up making 4 of these. And when you're done, if you pin, everything should be nice and straight, and this is how it will look if you're pressed open. If you're not pressed open, if you press the seams according to the pattern, it will all lay flat. Now we're going to move to hourglass blocks. We have our fabric A, our fabric K, and our fabric H. And I always recommend anytime you're making an hourglass block to assemble it where you're going to be trimming it down after so that you get it nice and straight. And we do have a free guide on Fat Quarter Shop on hourglass blocks that you can print out and just have at home, and that will make it really easy for you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put these all together and we're gonna cut on the diagonal twice. Now, because we're trimming down, we can do that. If you're not trimming down, you wouldn't be able to do that because you would need it to be cut exact. So what I'm gonna do is cut on the diagonal, and you do need to do this as close as possible. And that's gonna give you 4 gray triangles, 4 white triangles, and 8 orange triangles. So first thing I'm gonna do is just stack all my colors up. Now I'm gonna take a design board, I'm gonna take a gray and a white, put those opposing. And then I'm gonna put 2 orange on the other side. Move these out of the way for now. And then I'm gonna turn it on the diagonal because that's how I'm gonna think about sewing it. So I'm gonna put these 2 right sides together, these 2 right sides together. I'm gonna pin, and I'm gonna sew along this edge with a 1/4 inch seam, and you will be making 4 hourglass blocks. I'm gonna show you how to make one. So I'm using a 1/4 inch foot. After I sew that first piece, I'm gonna leave a little bit there. I'm not gonna cut my stitches, and I'm gonna keep sewing. That's gonna keep them connected, which is gonna make the next step just a little bit easier. From here, set your seams, press to one side, and then after you press to one side, then you are gonna press open. And I like to finger press open. When you press open, look at the back, then look at the front and make sure it's perfectly flat. From here, put it back on your design board. Then you will need to clip this apart, put them right back together, and you're gonna pin both ends first. Once you have that done, then you're going to line this up where the white and the gray touch and the orange touch. Lay it flat and pin. And then we're gonna sew with a 1/4 inch seam. And this block, I wanted to point out, all of these edges are biased. So it is gonna be harder to get this to be flatter than if you were working with just an unbiased seam. A clapper is a really good tool to make your block nice and flat. If it didn't originally come out flat, you would put the clapper on once it is hot and don't remove it until everything has cooled. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to trim this down. There's 2 different ways you can trim down. The easiest is to have a Creative Grids 3.5 inch square ruler, place it down, and then you place your center, your 2 corners, and your 2 corners, and you stitch around. But if you don't have a fancy ruler like this, another thing you can do is use a rectangular ruler. So you take 3.5 divided by 2, and that's 1 3/4. And what you do is draw lines 1 3/4 away from the center. So you've got 1 3/4, you line that up, and you're hoping that they all end with this little square. So you've got your line up here, correct? You've got your 1 3/4, and I would do all 4 sides first, and then trim down. So if you don't have a fancy dancy ruler like this, you can just mark your lines and then cut. And I wanted to make sure that all 4 of these points met exactly where they are, so that when you're doing your 1/4 inch seam, you actually get the actual correct seam. So you're gonna make 4 of these, just like this. So now that we've made our hourglass block, we're gonna make some sparkle units that go to the left and the right. So you're gonna take a fabric J rectangle, and I'm gonna do this so you visually can see. So you take your fabric J rectangles and your fabric G squares, draw a line from corner to corner. And then you're gonna follow this and follow this. You're going to use your seam-align glue to keep that in place. Stitch directly on those lines, trim a 1/4 inch away, and you're going to make 4 left sparkle units and 4 right sparkle units. Once those are done, they're going to look like this. And what you're going to do is you're going to make sure you have your fabric going the right way. So all 3 grays should be at the top. That's an easy mistake to make. Then you're going to put right sides together and pin. And you can leave it this way. This is the way the pattern is written. Or you can continue and press open, which is what I like to do. You're going to make 4 of these. This is how it looks pressed open, and this is how it looks pressed to one side. Once it's quilted, you won't be able to see any kind of difference at all. I'm just showing you so you can see the difference. So once you've made 4 of these, we're going to move to page 3. We did call these the dazzle units. We're going to move to page 3 and we're going to make a square and a square block. You're going to use a fabric in square and 4 of your fabric eye squares. Draw a line from corner to corner on the white squares. You're going to start with 2 opposing corners. It doesn't matter if it's these 2 or these 2. Now you can either pin here or you can use your seam-align glue. And like I said in the previous video, if you let it dry a little bit, you're going to have better results. You're going to stitch directly on those lines, trim a 1/4 inch away, and it's going to look like this. Then you're going to add your remaining squares. And you're going to do that same thing. So what I'm trying to do is just line up everything and then add my glue instead of adding the glue and then adding the square. Stitch on those lines and then press. And this is what your bright unit is going to look like, but this is basically a simple square and a square unit. Now we're going to take all of the units we've made and we're going to assemble the spirit star block. So we're going to start with our bright unit, which is our center. Then we're going to add our sparkle units, and your white is going to touch the inside. Then you're going to add these units, and your square is going to touch the insides. So the way I like to think about it is white, 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 square, 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 and then you know it's in the right order. What I'm going to do is put these right sides together, pin in place. I'm going to take a design board and put them on there in this order. I'm going to stitch with a 1/4 inch seam all the way down, and I'm going to leave thread in between each one so it stays chained together. Now I'm going to set my seams, and after I do that, I'm going to press towards this direction and then towards this direction, or you can press open, however you want to do it. When I'm doing that, you can see I've got my chains together so it all stays together. And then come back and just keep adding. I would love to know how many of you use chain piecing, which is what this technique is called. It's one of the very first techniques I ever learned and definitely has saved the day lots of times when I could have got things out of order. And then we're going to sew this, press the same way, and then sew the last 2 seams. Now when you're looking at this, hopefully you didn't chop off these points or these points or these points. Then you're going to put your fabrics right sides together and pin at each intersection and then sew that final seam, and we'll almost be done with our block. Now you're going to take your block and you're going to add fabric E rectangles to the left and the right side. The block is the same no matter which direction it goes, so that doesn't matter. You're going to put them right sides together, pin at the top and the bottom, and then ease it through. And this is gonna be your framed spirit star block. And if you're doing the table runner or the table topper, this is how you're going to assemble it. Now, before I move to the smaller block, I am going to cut right here just to give it a nice shape and get all of these loose threads off. So you can see I did not chop off any of my seams or go into any of the seams that would be 1/4 inch. I just want to get the edges straight. This is our harder block. Now we're going to move to our easier block, which is the Spooky Stars block. So this block is going to use a combination of half square triangles. Half of them are purple and gray, and half of them are purple and white. So you're going to take a fabric B square and a fabric O square. You're going to draw the lines just like I showed you earlier, where it's 1/4 inch away from the center. You can either use this method or you can use the seam guide by Creative Grids, either one. You're going to put a gray square and a purple square together, stitch directly on those lines. It will look like this. Then you're going to cut this apart, and that's going to give you 2 for each square. You're going to press these towards the purple, and you're going to make a total of 4 for each block, but you're going to make a total of 8 total for both blocks. You're going to do the same exact method with your fabric O and your fabric I. Stitch 1/4 inch away from the center, cut those apart. You're going to press these also towards the purple, and you're going to make 4 of these for each block, 8 total. So you should have 8 gray purple and 8 white purple. Now let's take these and make a block with our fabric L square. So I'm going to take a fabric L square. It's going to go in the center. And then what I'm going to do is just follow the diagram, and I'm going to do the whites first. And I usually don't get this right the first time, and I just kind of follow the lines. Then I'll do the gray. And this is where I'm going to triple check. Then you're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam, press open. Then you're going to add the next seam, press open. Then you'll do the final 2 seams and press open, and that is going to give you 2 of the Spooky Star units. They are 6.5 inches square. Then we're going to add a fabric F rectangle in between, so no matter which way you rotate it, it stays the same. You're going to put this right side together, pin. You're going to press this towards the F, and then you'll add this one to the end. Add this one, and what I like to do is put that rectangle on top. I prefer to have all my seams on the bottom. I feel like it gives me a better result. Now this is a lot of seams, and you can see just a lot of seams. So what I would do on something like this is I would press it all over to get it hot. And I would put clappers on this. And I would let that sit until all the heat evaporates. That's going to get your block as flat as possible. And a cool tip is, if you're sewing all day, what you can do is, if you've got really complicated blocks, you can let those clappers sit overnight, and in the morning you will be impressed with how flat your blocks are. So now I am going to do that final all over cut or trim, making sure not to chop anything off. And this is your Spooky Stars block. It should be 6.5 by 13.5. And then this is your framed spirit star block, which should be 11.5 by 13.5. Now, that wasn't too hard, was it? These stars are a great complement to block 1, which is our witchy ghost. And if you've gotten this far, you're actually more than halfway done, because we've only got 1 more block, and then we have a cool finishing that will either make a square or a rectangle. Make sure you subscribe, and I will see you next week. So for a super fun block, you guys can comment and see if you can guess what block 3 is going to be.